Hey everyone, George here, and welcome back to the Art of Water. One of the questions that I'm asked a lot is how do I achieve harmony in my fish tank? So, a lot of people watch my videos and they see my tanks and they, leave a lot of comments about, the peacefulness and the harmony of those tanks and how do I get to that point? Well, one of the main things that I think is important whenever you're scaping a tank is to sort of get an idea as to what the tank is going to be used for. Is it for personal use? Is it for a friend? Is it for a show? Is it for something that you're going to set up in your store as a prop to show people what they can do, sort of as a selling point? There's a lot of different reasons why people are, scaping a tank, and it really is something that you need to give a little bit of thought about before you just dive in. One of the most important things I think about when I scape a tank is what am I using it for? How big does the tank need to be? For example, right now, nano tanks are very popular and they have been for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And that is people who are getting into the hobby and trying to jam as much stuff as they possibly can, a little ecosystem in a small environment, and trying to achieve the best results from that. And it's a lot of fun trying to do it, and it's very goal oriented and is so um, beautiful when you're done if you've put a lot of thought into it and you really have an idea and have done your homework about what your goal is. The first thing I like to talk about is the tank itself. Do I want a rimless tank? Do I want one that's sort of a standard old fashioned tank? I personally like rimless tanks simply because they are a piece of art in themselves. It's sort of like floating glass, really, and especially if you get low iron glass, which is my favorite because the clarity on low iron glass is just truly amazing. Now, I have tanks all over my office here. This is one of the rooms in my house that I spend most of my time in, so therefore I have a lot of tanks set up in this area. And as you can see, each tank has a variety of different scape ideas that I'm going to kind of go through a few of them with you just to give you an idea as to how you might think about what you want to do and what you're trying to achieve. And I do that by thinking about what does that tank look like in my head before I start scaping it. I get a conceptual idea of that, and then I put it down on paper. I sort of draw out a small sketch that gives me an idea of what that tank's going to look like. Then I start to think about things like hardscape and some of those kind of things, the plants, the hardscape, the wood. Am I going to be using woods that are going to require something to anchor them down? Am I going to be using woods that have already been sort of seasoned a little bit so that they don't float and cause a problem? There's nothing worse than putting a scape together and planting it and everything and then having your wood just sort of float to the top and disrupt the whole thing. That is a real drag when that happens. So really put some consideration into that kind of thing. What kind of substrate am I going to use? Am I going to have invertebrates in the tank that are going to require a certain pH? So is my substrate and my stone going to affect that pH? Most shrimp, for example, like a pH that is less than 7, and that sometimes is really easy to do, and sometimes it's not. It just really depends a great deal on the kind of stone and hardscape that you're putting in the tank that is going to affect that pH and buffer it, or create an environment where you need to sort of add something to it, some kind of a chemical or whatever to keep the balance. Now, most of my tanks, when I use the kinds of stones that I use, such as maple stone, dragon stone, I have used stone that I have actually gone and gotten myself from volcanic areas. So I have black and red volcanic stones in some of my tanks. And then I have some unusual stones too that I'm not going to go into all of them, but I do have some unusual stones that I use as well. And all of those, you sort of have to do your research on them a little bit and find out exactly how those stones are going to behave with your water and what kind of livestock you're going to be able to put in there and invertebrates and so forth. What I like to do, as I said, is to sort of lay out the scape in my mind on paper and sort of get an idea as to how I'm going to lay it out. Now, the next step in that obviously is the plants. What kind of plants am I going to have? For example, if you're looking at this particular tank, it's got sort of a jungle look. That's very much intentional. I do go in and trim these plants occasionally, but they grow very quickly. And I do like to have that environment for this tank because of the types of fish that are in here and the invertebrates. I have cherry shrimp in here. I have blue velvet shrimp in here. I have chili rasporas, and I also have rainbow green illuminati fish that are all basically nanotank size fish that can live in a very small environment, but both need hiding spots or places of cover where they feel comfortable and they do not feel like they're competing constantly or fighting with each other for places for them to hide or hang out. Now, these are very, very calm fish by nature anyway, so there really isn't a lot that you have to do. But in this particular tank, I did have quite a bit of shrimp before I added the fish, and I wanted the shrimp to feel comfortable that they had a lot of places to hide. And also I do have a couple of autocinclids in here, which I do keep on hand in all of my tanks just to make sure that if any algae does sort of crop up, that I do have the ability to sort of put a stop to that by the autocinclids sort of taking over and getting that to be something that they can just handle on their own. Now, a lot of times, if you don't have a lot of algae in your tank, which is the goal not to have, you may have to supplement your autocinclids and your invertebrates with some kind of an algae tab of some sort, and there are many of them out there on the market that are fantastic. I don't recommend one over the other. I'm just saying that you have to pay attention to that. Autocinclids are very sensitive to, if they don't get enough to eat, their bellies will shrink, and then once that happens, it's hard to get them to eat again, and then they just simply die. So you always want to make sure that you're putting just a little bit of that in your tank. It won't foul your tank up because the autocinclids love it, the shrimp love it, and even sometimes your fish will go down and pick at it too. We don't think of fish as eating algae tabs really, but you'll find that even from cardinals to ember tetras to rummy nose tetras, a lot of your raspora family, they're all going to eat up on algae tabs if they are at the bottom. For some reason, they just do like to pick at it, and it's a great source of food for them as well. Going back over to this tank here, this tank was built with the idea of sort of being an island sort of tank. Now I've got a little bit of green algae just on the glass over here that I'm noticing that I missed. Whenever I do a water change, I do try to take a toothbrush and go in there and scrub around the walls as best as I can. The first thing you want to think about when you're scaping a tank is putting stuff in the center of the tank and leaving the areas around the edges, including the front of the glass, the back of the tank, and the sides open enough to where you can comfortably get in there with a toothbrush and be able to scrub out those areas each time you do a water change. If you do it just very lightly each time, which I missed this one today, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I did that, but I'll get to that after I make this video. But yeah, if you go in there with your toothbrush and just sort of scrub around a little bit, you're going to find that that's just going to be a real easy thing to keep under control. And again, your auto cichlids are going to take care of many of the algae that are in your tank, but this green stuff that's growing up here is not something that the auto cichlids are going to be desiring. So that's going to have to be something that you take the toothbrush to. Now, the more plants that you have in your tank, the more they compete with algae. And so I always tell everyone, and I think most scapers who are good at this and have done it for a long time will tell you, plant your tank as much as you possibly can and you can afford from the very get-go, so that you can get through that algae phase, which every tank as it's cycling or even after it's cycled is going to go through that period where it is going to have that blast of algae trying to establish itself. And if you've got a lot of plants in the tank and your plants are healthy and you're running CO2 and you've got good fertilizers and stuff like that going to keep your plants healthy, they're going to really put a stop pretty much to the algae growth in a healthy tank. Now, getting back to the scaping of a tank, I use the rule of thirds, which is kind of what they call the golden rule. And I learned this from several people that are builders and are on the YouTube here that are great scapers, such as George Farmer, James Finley, the guys over at Green Aqua. All of these people are just very good at what they do. And on this particular tank, getting back to it, it's sort of an island sort of look in the middle. And the only thing that I have in this tank are sparkling Grammies. I have 4 in there. I have a male and 3 females. And the interesting thing about the sparkling Grammy is they do make kind of a little crackling, croaky sound. It's kind of fun to listen to. I didn't really believe that they did that until I actually heard it with my own ears, and it was kind of fun because I was just sitting here one day in my office and I heard this noise and I thought, what the heck is that? Where's that coming from? I thought I actually had a cricket in my office someplace, but it was these guys. And now, as they've been established in this tank more, it's the male typically talking either to the females, or if you had a rival male in the tank with him, they will not fight, but they'll just run up against each other to sort of let each other know that this is their territory in the tank, and they will make that sort of croaking little sound that is sort of unique to that particular fish. Now, they're not the only fish out there that makes noise. I know it's hard to believe that fish can actually make noise underwater and we can hear it, but they do. And there are some other ones out there. You can look that up if you want to. But these guys are great little fish for a nano tank. This is just a 5-gallon here. And as you can see, it's extremely healthy. The fish are fantastic in here. The only other fish that I have, like I said, is a couple auto cichlids that I do keep in my tanks just to make sure that algae is kept at bay. And you want to get at least 2 auto cichlids. Auto cichlids do not do well on their own. When they're harvested in the wild, they typically are found in literally schools of 1,000 or more fish at a time. So they are fish that like to have their own kind around. So if you're going to do a small little nano tank like this, keep in mind that if you are adding auto cichlids to it, that you do want to make sure that you are getting at a minimum 2 so that they do well together. Going back to another tank that I have in this particular office area here is this tank here. As you can see, we have a tank that is scaped with maple wood, or excuse me, maple stone, and we have some spider wood in there. And then the main plants that are around in here are some crypts and petite nana, Anubias nana, and I use a lot of that in my tanks. There is another type of Anubias in here as well, and in the back there is a Rosetta sword, and that is pretty much enough for a tank that is 6.7 gallons. And again, sort of an island look with the rule of thirds here, where it is heavy on one side and everything is just sort of down the middle and divided up so that the tank has a natural ability to draw the eye to the beautiful parts of the tank that you have sort of designed in your mind and then implemented into the tank. And I think it's really important that you do that. So going through the steps here, when you're designing a tank, think about what the goal is. Think about what your hardscape is going to be, your substrate. That's another important thing that we haven't talked about, substrate. I use a couple of different kinds here depending on the tank, but I like to use as dark a substrate as I possibly can depending on the fish. But it just happens to be that most of the fish that I particularly like and care about myself are fish that like a darker substrate. And so I use fluval stratum for, I would say, 75 or 80% of my tanks, and it really does show off the fish up against it. They just pop with that dark substrate, whatever your color your fish happen to be, unless they're black, of course, are really going to be shown off real well with that. So getting back to it is penciling out and drawing up your scape, your hardscape, and getting some kind of an idea or a perception as to what you want to achieve with that, and sort of making sure that you know exactly what you're doing when you lay it out, so that when you start the scape, it's fun. It's not stressful. It's not something that you are sort of struggling with the idea of what you're going to do with the tank. So again, if you want to put it down on paper or draw a small sketch out, or if you've just got a great mind for that sort of thing and you have a visual, try to at least get some idea of what you want to do and what kind of fish are going to do well in that environment, based on what you're trying to achieve. And again, if you're just doing a scape and you don't even have an idea of what kind of fish you're going to put in there, that's one way of doing it. But I like to think of the kind of fish that I have an idea for the scape on, and try to build the scape around that particular fish, so that I am making an environment in which they are going to be conducive to that environment, and so forth. So going back to the original tank that we were looking at a few minutes ago, this is a great example of a tank that's been going for a while and is needing a little bit of a trim here and there. We do have some issues with some of the plants that are getting kind of tall down here in the front and on the sides here, and also some of the taller ones in the back. Basically, what I will do is I will clip off the tops of some of these back here and then stuff them down into the soil, where they'll root very quickly, especially if you're using fertilizers of some sort and you do have some fertilizer tabs in your soil. They're going to really root very quickly, and again, add to the peacefulness and the look of your tank, and also add some beneficial factors to it as far as bringing more oxygen in, As you know, plants do take in carbon monoxide and they give off oxygen, so that is very healthy for your fish. On the top here, on this particular tank, we have some floating plants. I believe this is frogswort that's sort of taken off. You got to really pay attention to this stuff because it will take over. The root systems on them will grow very quickly in a healthy tank, and you do have to either keep the root systems trimmed, and you do have to cull the shoots that come off these because they will rapidly grow new shoots and sort of take over the top of your tank. And you got to be careful with that because if you have a certain amount of light that you are requiring your plants to have, you got to think about that. You have to think about, do I have plants that are low to medium light? Do I have plants that require high light? These are all factors that you have to take into consideration. And when you're doing that, you have to keep in mind that everything you do to your tank is going to affect the long term of that tank. Now, this is a very peaceful tank here. I basically have 7 cardinal tetras in here. I did have 10, and I lost 3 of them on the very first night. It's a mystery as to why, but the water parameters were perfect and everything. It just, I guess 3 of them just didn't do well for whatever reason. It may have been that we had a temperature shift that cardinals can be very sensitive to. So you have to be careful about that sometimes and know that when you're doing a water change or if you're acclimating fish to your tank that you are giving it some time. I spend an hour acclimating fish, regardless of whether somebody might tell you that it only needs 20 minutes to float them in the water and whatever. I don't do that. I float them. I actually add water from the tank that they're going into very slowly, sometimes on a drip type system, or I will just use a turkey baster, draw some of the water out and let it go into the bag. So I guess what I'm trying to cover here is when you're doing a scape, thinking about all the things that are going to go into that scape and what your goal is, and achieving harmony in a tank with fish is the most important and last component that I want to talk about. Do your research. Try to figure out what fish get along with each other. As you notice, these fish are not competing with each other because the green neon rasporas that are at the top there are basically top dwellers, and the cardinal tetras that are in here are medium tank to lower in the tank. It just depends. They sort of move around basically to wherever they want to go in the tank. So, but the green neon rasporas are basically almost always at the top. I generally don't see them anywhere else unless I've thrown a tab in of algae for my autocinclids that are in here. Then they will sort of go down to the bottom and sort of pick away at that stuff. But harmony with fish is very important. Doing your research and knowing exactly what kind of fish sort of work with each other in a small environment. We're talking about a tank that's only 5 gallons here. We're not talking about a large tank, but there's a lot of places for fish to hide. There's a lot of places for fish to sort of be on their own if they want to be. And there is no fighting going on. You do see a little bit of chasing around with the green neon rasporas, but that's just their nature. They're not hurting each other. There's no picking at their fins or anything like that. And I notice that 90% of the time when they do that, it's because they think I'm going to feed them and they're chasing each other out of the way, competing for food. I haven't fed them today, so I will be doing that shortly, but that's generally why when they see me standing in front of the tank, their idea is like Pavlov's dog. Their idea is that they're going to get some food from me. I want to apologize. I do have a very bad cold and a sore throat, and when I started this, my voice was good, but I've sort of been losing it along the way, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up. But I want to talk about that a little bit because a lot of people ask me, how do you achieve such great tranquility and harmony in your fish tanks? And I would say that the number one thing is to really think about what you're doing every step of the way, and know that every change you make to an established tank is going to affect every single thing in that tank. So really think it over and try not to play around with your tanks as much as you can, because when you do, you really are taking a chance that you're going to upset the balance or even lose fish that you've had for a long time. Healthy fish can really get stressed out, and stress is the biggest killer of fish. And it's one of those things that if you play around with your tanks a lot and you're losing fish, that might be why. So think about what your goal is, and if you're going to have more than one tank, you know, um, and you're going to do multiple tanks in your home, just know that whenever you're making changes, that you are affecting the harmony of the tank. And really think about what you're doing, because it can cause you a lot of heartaches when you lose fish over something that you thought you wanted to do to a tank and you found out it really wasn't a great idea. Anyways, going back to this particular tank over here, it's one of my favorites in the office because of the beauty of it. It's just a very simple scape. It wasn't expensive to build. It's got some dragon stone in there. It's got some lilies, some water lilies, some petite Nana, which I love. And then there are a few guys that I just added here recently that are some ferns that are growing back there. They have not quite established themselves. I took them some clippings from another tank and I put them in there, and that's actually about double the size that they are from just a week ago. Anyways, wrapping this up, I just want to kind of remind you that whenever you're thinking about putting a scape together, again, make sure you sit down and think about what you're trying to achieve. Think about the harmony of the fish that are going to be in there. Do these fish get along with each other? Are you making a species tank where you're having one particular kind of fish in there? Are you going to be adding invertebrates to your tank? What does that do to the balance of the tank? And lots of things to consider. Anyways, please leave your comments. If you have any questions, leave me a question and I'll get back to you. Please subscribe. Please give me a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. I'm not doing this as a living. As you can see, I'm in the music business, but this is one of my hobbies, and I really, really enjoy it. I'm going to be doing a new Scape tomorrow, and I hope to be filming it, so I hope you look forward to that in the next week or so. When I'm done with that, I'll be videoing it as I go, and that'll give you a little bit more of an idea as to my thinking about how to put a Scape together and what I put into it. And I'll be talking as I go along as to why I'm doing certain things. Anyways, George here with The Art of Water. Thank you again for watching, and again, please make some comments, please subscribe, and please give us that wonderful thumbs up just to let us know that you're enjoying the video, and gives me an idea on some of the subjects that I'm hitting on as to whether or not they're popular with people out there that are in the hobby. Anyways, George with The Art of Water, we'll talk again soon.